Hello, my name is Michael Winters. I'm the instructor of this course, Psychological Self-Care During the Coronavirus Pandemic. Well, I'd like to welcome you to this Women's Institute of Houston Special Spring Session 2020. At the beginning of the semester, we had no idea that we would have a need for this, but as things have turned out the way they have the past few months, we decided that this would be an offering that might be of benefit to many people in the Houston area. So welcome. My name is Michael Winters. I've taught several courses here at the Women's Center. I'm a psychologist. I've been in private practice here in Houston for a while. For many years before that, I was at the Rice University Counseling Center and ended there as director. And then been in private practice the past few years. Let me tell you about how we're going to run this course. This is a 4-session course. So the first session, I will be providing this video. And the way that you'll access this is you'll be sent the link to this video. And that's the same for session 2 and 3. And then session 4 will be live on May 26th, 10:30 a.m. We'll send you all the login information you need for that. And that will be the active, interactive time for questions and answers about the things that we've talked about or anything else that we haven't talked about. I'm very excited about the session 2 and 3 of this course because it gives me an opportunity to share the knowledge of 2 very, very skilled and really brilliant, wonderful human beings. Second session, Dr. Alejandro Chaoul, and the third session, Dr. Stefan Schulenberg. Dr. Chaoul will talk about Tibetan yoga, meditation, and mindfulness. And he has for many years, he's worked at MD Anderson and other places in Houston, but currently he's the founding director of the Mind, Body, Spirit Institute at the Jung Center of Houston. And the third session, Lessons from Disaster Psychology and Positive Psychology, will be an interview with Dr. Stefan Schulenberg, professor and director of Clinical Disaster Research Center at the University of Mississippi. And he has just wrote a book published in February exactly on disaster psychology and positive psychology and how those interact. And I think he will have some really, really interesting insights that are fairly new to academia, but he's also able to break that down in a way that will be very interesting, I think, for you and very useful as well. So let's move on and jump into the topic for today, which is kind of an overview. And I'll give you an organizer for this. This is how I think about this. This is the person that I really follow, Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist, psychologist too, but actually PhD in philosophy as well. But his real kind of fame, unfortunately, was that he was a survivor of several concentration camps in World War II. And he presented a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is an international bestseller. Library of Congress names it one of the most influential books of all time. And it shares his experiences in a concentration camp. And very, very powerful. But I want to use this really today. It's not a focus on Viktor Frankl as much as it is recognizing that there is something that he came up with in that book and his other 30 books that he wrote, which is called the dimensional ontology. And the dimensional ontology basically says that human beings are complex. We come from 3 different dimensions. And to understand the human being, you have to understand all of them. So this won't sound revolutionary to you, but let me just go through it anyway. So the first is that as human beings, we have a body. We are made of DNA, of blood, skin. The body is a part of what it means to be a human being. To understand the human being, you have to understand the physical, the body part. That's part of who we are. But he also says the body is not sufficient. We also have a mind. We have something that goes beyond the body. And this mind is our ability to learn. So if you think about it, the body gets information through instinct, through it's encoded in DNA. The mind gets information through learning. It is responsive to the environment, and it can adapt and change in ways that the body can't. And so the body and the mind, those are two aspects of the human being, but that's not complete. Frankl says that we also need to really understand the human being. There's the body, which is fully physical, the mind, which is physical but open to something beyond. We learn something, we can conceptualize something that isn't just it's not just a physical reality. We can manipulate it in a way. And so it's not just physical. But beyond that, the spirit, and actually he didn't use the word spirit, he would use nous or noetic, but I'm going to use the word spirit because I think it's a little easier to understand. But one of the reasons he didn't like that word was in English, spirit often takes on a connotation of religion. And while he was not opposed to religion and saw this level of the human being as being where religion might exist, spirit is really that which is uniquely human. So we share with other mammals a body and a mind, but the spirit is really something which is uniquely human. So, for example, things like courage, things like humor, those exist in that spiritual dimension that other animals don't really have or have at the same level as what it means to be a human being. And so the body is purely physical. The mind is part physical, part not physical. Spirit is not physical at all. It is, it's not a realm of the physical world. It is timeless. It is ageless. If you think about things like, do you love someone who has died? Well, you don't love the body. The body decomposes, fairly quickly. You don't really love the mind. You might have pleasant memories, but the idea of love being this timeless thing, it's not the physical capacities of the person that you love. It's the spirit. And so to really understand a human being, you have to recognize that there's a body, mind, and spirit that all go together. So if I were to say, here's a cup, okay? To understand this cup, if you just look at it this way, you might say, well, that cup looks like a rectangle. If you look at it this way, you might say, that looks like a circle. But to really understand the cup, you have to understand it as a three-dimensional entity. It is a cylinder in one way, but it's not only a cylinder, it's hollow. And so it can hold liquids. It is not, you can't just understand one dimension or another dimension. You really have to understand all three dimensions to really get what this cup is. It's not just a circle. It's not just a rectangle. It is a three-dimensional entity. And that's what it means to understand kind of the human being in all of their capacities. So the reason that I'm doing this is kind of just to give an organizer so that we can look at, when we talk about psychological coping, we can really think about it in those three dimensions. And to start with, the base is the care for the body. This is essential to be a healthy human being. We have to recognize we do need to start with the body. So care for the body at all times, but in particular in times of crisis. So what we're dealing with now with the coronavirus, we do need to get adequate sleep. If we don't get adequate sleep, you can go a day or two or maybe a week without getting much sleep or sleeping irregularly. But if you go much more than a week without getting good sleep, other things are going to fall. You just can't function. We're not designed to function well without adequate sleep. So recognizing, how do I take advantage of, how do I create the conditions where I can sleep well? And if I'm not sleeping well, what do I need to do to modify that? The second is diet, in meaning the general terms of, are you eating well? Sometimes it might be just easier to just, get some junk food, things that aren't that healthy. But ultimately, this would be a time to really focus on eating well. How do you get enough vegetables? How do you have lean proteins in your diet, and making sure that you're doing that rather than maybe just eating something that's convenient but not that healthy, or over relying on foods that are not that healthy. Really pay attention to that at this time. And next is exercise. Really important to take care of your body in the best ways that you can. Of course, there's some people that, for a variety of reasons, shouldn't exercise in certain ways. This is not meant to replace any dialogue with your physician, but to recognize that regular movement and getting appropriate exercise is going to be really important in maintaining your resilience at this time. And the last point here is being careful about overindulging. I've got a friend, colleague in Pennsylvania, and back in late March, I had a conversation with her on the phone, and she was telling me, Pennsylvania is one of the few states that has state-sponsored state-sponsored liquor stores, and they had decided to close those stores. And she said she saw on TV, people going with 2 or 3 shopping carts to just fill up to get as much alcohol as they could. She said she didn't realize there were that many alcoholics in Pennsylvania. And to me, there's a sense of, when you're overwhelmed or when you don't know what's coming up, it might be pleasant to kind of make sure you have plenty of alcohol on hand. And I'm not saying you can't have a glass of wine with dinner. I'm saying that overindulging is ultimately not going to be helpful for your body or the rest of you. It's going to create more difficulties. So just being cautious and careful about overindulging as a way to try to cope with this. It might seem like a good idea in the short run, but over the long haul, it's not a good idea. So next is care for the mind. And with the care for the mind, we want to be looking at the mind as both thought and social activities. They come together. Again, the mind is what we think, but it's also about learning. And I think it's also where a lot of times the social component comes together. So the body isn't as social. It's more the biological entity. The mind, again, a little more amorphous, but it's what we think about. It's also how we connect with other people. So one of the pieces here that we want to be really careful about is limiting obsessive stimulation. So watching too much TV, news reports or something like that is not going to be that helpful. You think about the news cycles. Sometimes there will be a news station that plays basically the same episode 30 minutes long, and they play it over and over all day. Once you've watched that 30-minute episode, you don't need any more. There may be things that someone thinks is newsworthy, but it's really not that important for you. So this isn't just watching television, but it could be consuming news in other ways. On my iPad, I have New York Times, and sometimes I'll go and refresh it multiple times a day. And I've decided, okay, if I read it once, any new information is going to still be there tomorrow. So I don't need to be focused on consuming that much information. The vital information is going to be there, and things aren't changing so quickly that you need an update. This is not like Harvey, where different parts of the city are flooding at different times. This crisis is going to be something over time. We're going to get more information. You don't need to be focused on it on a regular basis. So, if you're getting 20 or 30 minutes of news, that's probably sufficient, and find other things to do. So other things to do might be having variety, looking at ways, if you're kind of cooped up in the house, how do you do things in new ways? Maybe read something that you haven't read. If you are watching something on television or listen to something a little different. Try something different. Keep yourself not just doing the same thing over and over again. So this is going to be a little different than some of the information that I give you a little bit later, but it's so there is a role in having a routine, but in terms of what's going on, what you're exposing your mind to, really aiming for a variety kind of keeps you fresher, keeps you more alert, and it's going to be better for you. Third point here is maintaining connection. Really finding ways to connect with others. So telephone, video chat, email connection, finding a way to keep the connection with people that are important in your life. One of the things that I think may be important here is that a lot of times we might be tempted to call a friend and just talk about how you're coping with the virus. This is a huge thing. It's impacting us in so many different ways. But maintaining connection might mean you go beyond that. You go to what's deep and important about your relationship that was before this virus came along and will be afterwards. One of the ways I think about it is kind of finding a balance to get to something deep that's not just sappy sentimentality, but is moving towards that depth of why are you important in my life? And just being able to acknowledge that and pushing towards that. Again, not every conversation has to go there in a deep way, but really recognizing this time is an opportunity to reflect on why people are important in our lives. And then the last point here on not overindulging, in a way that's kind of mirroring the limit the obsessive stimulation, not overindulging on that, but it's also coming back to this idea of substances or anything that might make us feel good in the moment, but isn't really um, going to provide a real benefit. So alcohol, other drugs, spending, you can certainly go on Amazon and buy a lot of things, but really being cautious about that. Looking again back to variety, looking to connecting with others, those are going to be much more powerful ways to care for the mind at this time. So we also have this idea of care for the spirit. So here, my little image, if you look at it, it's about light and seeing light coming down to us individually. So we are not the light, but we are shined upon by the light. So that's kind of what that image is supposed to represent there. And how do we care for the spirit? So first of all, take time for reflection. We have maybe more time, even if you're working or something like that. If you're not commuting anymore, you're staying at home. That gives you an opportunity to really take that time for reflection. The experience that we're having now is unique. We haven't had this happen in our lifetimes. So how do we take time to reflect? How do we take time to look at what is really important to me? Not just in this situation, but of course in this situation, what's really important, and how do I recognize that? How do I really reflect on what is important in my life and use this time to engage in that reflection? I mentioned before, maintaining rituals, maintaining some kind of structure can be really important. Whether that's yoga, whether that's prayer, whether that's a walk that you take with your spouse, maintaining those rituals that are meaningful, that do center you in your own spirituality. Those things are going to be as important now, if not more important now, than they ever have been. So finding a way to acknowledge that, maintain that. And the last point here is seeking a meaningful response. And what I mean by that is, I'm a meaning-centered psychotherapist, and so a lot of times people are like, well, what does that mean? Or they're might not fully understand, and to say, well, how can there be any meaning in the coronavirus? It's just killing millions of people. And what this idea of seek a meaningful response is that there is no inherent meaning in the coronavirus. The meaning comes from how we respond to it. It's not saying that out there is meaningful. Meaning comes from how I respond to it. What do I do? Are there things that I can do to help a neighbor? Maybe it's prepared food. Maybe it's be available to talk to them on the phone. It doesn't have to be real profound, but it's saying the meaning of this situation doesn't come from the virus. It comes from how I respond in my own situation. Maybe it's family, maybe it's friends, maybe it's some broader community thing like sewing masks or something like that. But it's looking for, how do I respond? What is it that I'm called to do in this time? And the more that you're able to do that, the more powerful I think that your personal coping will be. So we've looked at the body, the mind, and the spirit, but there is another level here, which is the integrated care, which is looking at all three of these. What are aspects or strategies that we can use that impact the body, mind, and spirit? And the first of those is being outdoors. there's some research fairly recently that showed that, and again, this is for the average person, it's not saying every person, but they showed really powerful impact of being outside at least 2 hours a week, a total of 2 hours a week, getting outside. So taking a walk, getting outside at least 2 hours a week. Now, of course, right now we're going to utilize appropriate social distancing. It could be you're outdoors, just sitting on your deck. You don't have to go anywhere, but it's about somehow being outdoors for at least 2 hours a week is a big shift, a big difference. People that get 2 hours or more of outdoor time function a lot better than people that get less than 2 hours. So my guess is that right now, because we're spending so much time inside, we need to even maybe boost that a little bit and try for a little more time. But looking for, if the weather permits, every day being outside for at least a little bit of time. That's, I think, something that is going to be good for body, mind, and spirit. Secondly, finding lightness and humor. There's so much that's dense. There's so much that's heavy. How do we make sure that we are looking for the opportunity for lightness and for humor? Norman Cousins, who famously got ill, and the doctors were talking about all the medical treatments, and he decided he wanted to watch funny movies. So he started watching funny movies, and that made a difference. He started feeling better. It was his attitude that started changing, and that he was flooding his environment with fun, with humor, rather than being overly reflective on what was wrong with him. So it's possible to find lightness and humor, to look for it, to engage in it, even when the situation overall looks dark and looks difficult. So really looking for ways to find lightness and humor, whether that's watching something funny, reading something funny, engaging in conversation that isn't so dark, but just finding ways to be with playful people. I might add that kind of just play. That does it. So if you can get access again safely to a child, they know how to play. We sometimes forget that as adults, but looking for a variety of ways to find lightness and humor, those are things that I think are going to be really, really important in terms of maintaining positive coping, positive psychological self-care. And the final point here in this integrated care is community connection. Being a part of something larger than yourself, a group, an organization, a family, and recognizing that that's going to take more time and energy now. We don't have that ease that we did. With social distancing, that may require that we do this through electronic means. But we can still do that. Notice in the image on the screen, there's a community, but they aren't all piled up on each other. They just have a line of connection to each other. So it's possible to have community when you're not physically connected, and that's the best guidance that we're getting right now is to maintain physical distance, which requires then that we work harder at making that emotional and social connection. How do we do that? How do we focus on that? What are ways that maybe we've kind of lost that in the past few weeks? How do we regain that? Maybe there's things like, that I don't really want to be on a Zoom meeting. Well, try it anyway. Be open to the positive possibilities, even if you don't have what you really want, which is the physical connection. Be open to the social connection, to the emotional connection. You don't have to have physical proximity to really connect with another. So be open to that and find ways to find that community. So this is just the overview, things that I think will be important to think about, reflect on. If you have further questions on it, you can email me. I'll give you my contact information, and I'll be glad to address that in our last session, which is scheduled, and that's May 26th, I think 10:30 to 11:30. But that will be the way to do that. So hopefully this has been something useful to think about. I'm looking forward, like I said, to the next 2 sessions where there will be interviews with people who really have a lot of knowledge, and I think will be very profound. For now, I'm Michael Winters, and I hope this was useful for you.